Okay, and welcome to Broken Silicon. This is actually a subject I've been asked about multiple times, and I'm not ignoring your reader mail questions. I just don't have the answers myself. And as luck would have it, someone reached out. So I'm Tom, and I'm joined by Lana. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Well, I'll go by William, but on the internet, I go by Boom.
Okay. Was it Psycho by... Because here you're the Boom, right?
Yeah. It's something I started when I started RuneScape. That was the first name I actually picked, was the Boom.
So I won't... That's a funny story, actually. I won't say what my gaming name is because I don't want to, but it comes from playing Battlefront 1 on PS2. And I made a character on that can also go online. And quite literally, I just copied that over from there in Age of Empires 2 since, I mean, God, when was 2000? All the way since like 2003 or something. Like that's literally, and I was like, yeah, I'll just stick with this name. This is fine.
Yeah.
It looks a little childish, I think, in some of my emails, which, of course, my emails you've communicated with are Moore's Law is dead. But I have some old emails that people probably think I'm 16 years old.
Yeah, I get that too. I have a professional email to be honest, though. That's what you've been communicating with.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know, why change it? I like it. So
yeah, well, it's because getting jobs.
Well, yeah. So speaking of that, though, so what made you reach out to me about this?
Well, I was watching one of your videos and somebody asked a question. I can't remember exactly what the question was, but it was related to networking.
Was this a loose ends video?
Yeah, it was talking about, I can't remember exactly what video I saw at the time. I'd have to look back when...
It doesn't matter. I make too many of them.
Exactly. I watch all of them, but I really do because when you're in IT, you spend a lot of time doing work, but also trying to preoccupy your mind.
I know what you mean. I listened to a YouTuber that I'll admit it. His name is Tone Vase, and he's like a Bitcoin trader. And for some reason, even though I don't think it's that great, it just fills my brain, which I'm not saying I'm not great, but I'm saying at the very least, it's like, he puts out live streams constantly, and you know what? It's good enough for me. I just need it in the background.
Well, you're one of the people that I was watching that convinced me that AMD stock is a good idea. So I do pay attention, at least.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say is definitely pay attention to maybe not my next big video, but one coming out in a couple of weeks. It is very Intel centric, so I'm going to make the devil's argument for what Intel could be doing.
Well, I will also make the networking argument as far as why what AMD is doing is actually very important on our side.
So why don't you touch on that? We did a small chat before this. This is how I kind of vet people sometimes. And you referenced the security issues in AMD. Why don't we go into that first before we get into 5G?
Yeah, so with the security issues, a lot of that has to do with arbitrary code. And so with the company I work for, and just to be clear, I'm not representing my company, I'm representing myself.
Yeah.
As you need to say. But essentially, I gave the link to how we respond to it. And this is, to summarize, the reason why we're not worried specifically as a networking company has more to do with the fact we don't allow arbitrary code to be executed on our platform. And I had a friend who was trying to, say, execute an application. And so the system would reject that because it's an arbitrary code to execute within the actual frameworks. And it was just completely rejecting it.
What do you mean when you say arbitrary code? Because I bet most people don't know what that means.
Yeah, I was about to explain. So arbitrary code just means any executable program. So any program that you're trying to push in or any script that you want to push in to do pretty much whatever you want. Say you want to run Minecraft through the actual framework. So you have like DOS screen and it's playing Minecraft or whatever for some weird reason. The system will reject stuff like that because it's not a part of the base system. And so stuff like that protects against the Spectrum and Meltdown leaks, because that's mainly what's required in terms of access in order to execute them. And this is why a lot of systems are vulnerable, is because that's not useful for every hardware or server platform, because you need to have a lot of malleability when you completely control the device. So this is why it's concerning to a lot of the people in the networking team and networking field, is because they have to customize the actual framework that's designed around it, so they can execute their own applications. And basically, they start from scratch, make their own thing, put it into the system, and for that reason, having it locked down isn't beneficial for them.
Right. And it's funny because I knew what you meant right away when you said arbitrary code, because this is the code that lets me not use a USB to HDMI adapter on my work laptop.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it has to install that one driver. And so if I buy something to use with my work devices, I know it has to work without a driver. It just has to have it inherently built into the device that it works on its own end. And if it requires some installation, I just know it's not going to work.
Yeah.
I understand why. I mean, I do understand why they would have that requirement.
Yeah. And a lot of what we talked about earlier was air gapping. And I brought up why that's actually still a concern, even if you air gap it, because of how updates and how alterations with the system work. So if all computer networking and all hardware has to be updated and has to be integrated with the firmware, especially networking equipment, because firmware helps block out bugs and all that kind of stuff, and they fix issues. Well, that means at one point it has to eventually reach the internet. And so I'm not going to say who, but I work with certain clients, and even the highest level, they do still have the ability to pull download files to upgrade the infrastructure. And this is the highest level of security type people. So if anyone's going to block it off completely, it would be them. But in these instances, it's impossible, because it is still a networking device. It still has to go do routing and all that kind of stuff. So even then, it still has to be updated. And in those update packages, unless you lock down arbitrary code to where it doesn't execute anything that it wants, unless it's a system like that, there's really not much you can do if the update was fraudulent or just spoofed and made to look legitimate.
So I think, and when you say the highest level of security customers, you mean medical records and financial companies, right?
A little bit higher than that.
So would this be government and voting?
Yeah, government. Definitely government. Highest level of government you can imagine is our clients. Is all I really can say.
Yeah, right. And so when they need to make their devices secure, I mean, in other words, what you're saying, the only way to make it 100% secure is to not allow arbitrary code and to air gap it, and it's still a problem, Spectre and Meltdown.
Yeah, it's still a problem if somebody made a legitimate, or somebody, how you get those USB drives out of nowhere and somebody somehow installs it into the, they plug it in, and somehow for some reason your USB allows that to happen. The network can be infected and the whole thing can be taken down. We also have permissions requirements. So there's a lot of other vulnerabilities that are required. And if those vulnerabilities are accessed, that means you have a bigger problem than our equipment. So that's why my company is not worried, and we're not worried, at least. And we're also doing the best. The new one, the zombie load, that one's one that's actually more worrisome, because it's not as simple as executing arbitrary code. It's actually a monitoring problem. And that's way harder to deal with. And it's also the fixes, as if you can read that document, and feel free to link it and share it. That's fine. I don't care about that, because that's all public information. that stuff is really harder to fix because it comes down to, are we going to impact or negatively impact our clients? In that specific one, the zombie load one, that one didn't actually, like in the Spectrum meltdown, it does mention other platforms, CPU platforms being affected, which is true because they're all x86 or they're all processing units and they use multi-threading.
Yeah.
But that's like saying all operating systems are technically malleable to a vulnerability, but that doesn't mean that the CPU can get affected if you have like external security. Like AMD has actual security that scans the computations, which is why they claim not to be affected.
It technically can be affected, but it's built to mitigate
to not be. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and you tell me if this is a bad analogy. The analogy I would make is, hey, look, depending on how far away from me you are when I shoot at you, depending on what gun I use, yeah, the cheapest bulletproof vest might block it. But look, some vests are meant to block certain bullets, and Intel's just isn't meant to block this type of thing. And yes, it could block, yes, the other vest could fail, but it's built to not fail. Even if technically it's not perfect. You never want to get shot. So
exactly. But in this case with zombie load, the reason it's more worrisome, it has to do with the fact that, and it only impacts Intel because it has to do with Hyper-V. And the only company that has that technology is Intel, or at least the only main one that uses that.
Currently, yeah.
Yeah. And so those affect Intel processors, but doesn't affect AMD. And this is... When we were talking about like voting systems, this all comes back to how this all relates to that. Is that if you look up on YouTube for DEF CON voting machines, that's all you have to search to actually see the evidence of it. One year they had the adults go, okay, let's see what we could do. And so then they played, I think, the Pac-Man theme song with the voting machines. And the encryption key, one of them was ABCDE. And... if that
sounds like a government machine to me.
Yeah, well, that's a private company, actually.
Oh, wow.
All our voting machines are actually manufactured and owned by private companies.
That's true.
But I would say is if your encryption key is that fantastical, the odds of me being able to replicate your network and make it look like a legitimate update in order to infect your system is probably fairly high with a legitimate and spoofed update. And if I can do that, therefore I can implant a logic virus and make the candidate I favor win and just put language that says ignore everybody else or fracture the vote of everybody else, which is something that is possible to look into. We can actually prove things like this.
Yeah, a comparison I would make, and this is again out of left field, this is when everyone takes a drink. So when my parents were getting Bitcoin, here we go, I'm bringing up Bitcoin, they used a certain wallet that wasn't the standard core wallet. Now, the core wallet is decentralized, and you don't really have to worry about anything being pushed onto it that, a million other people haven't approved at the same time. But if you use a centralized wallet, someone, I believe, hacked a Google server where those wallets in that part of the country were hosted. And they pushed in a thing that popped up. And it didn't happen to my parents, but I heard about this online. This thing would pop up saying, download this upgrade to the newest Bitcoin node. And what it did is it downloaded an application that stole all your Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to click download, but still, how many people probably did, right? Yeah. It's so scary to see that stuff.
Yeah. And this is one of the things that people don't know is that sometimes people will send out messages from IT and they'll say things like, this is legitimate, for instance. I'm just going to quote an email that happened to go out to somebody. People who know about the situation will know who I'm referring to when I say this is a specific way. I'll just say who it was. John Pedesta, when people were talking about John Podesta's thing, it was his fault. It was a combination of his fault and also IT, but it's his fault because he's not well versed on what to do if there is a password leak where your password gets out and stuff. But it was also IT's fault because they phrased it a specific way, which means
And could you give a little more background to what happened with John Pedesta?
So he basically got an email. It had a link, and this was the first email from a fisher who was trying to get his passwords to his email account so that they could log in and get all his emails. This was the whole WikiLeaks thing that people are worried about. When it came down to it, IT stated that this is legitimate, and they gave a link in Google to reset the password, the link for Google. But because they said this was legitimate, he ended up using that link. And so that's why IT has to, when they send out this stuff, has to be really, really careful of our wording. And we also have to to educate the people that never click a link, just go to the actual legitimate page. Like just go to Google.
Which is something I do, by the way. Well, for an example, I'll buy Microsoft Office, and they want to charge $200 for Microsoft Office Professional. But if I go to eBay, there's people selling keys for $10. Mm-hmm. Now, I have to be careful, though. If they give me a link to the download page, I'll always double check the link and go to the original source of the download page separately to make sure this, because that is a scam on eBay too. But they'll try to hack your machine that way. And I just know to do that.
Yeah. Right? Well, what will also happen is they'll spoof the link to make it look legitimate. You can actually make a link look for like it's from a legitimate source, but then have like a tiny URL and then shifts it over. But customizable links that redirect automatically are.
So that happened recently. I just didn't even trust it at all. I'm like, there's some reason I'm not trusting this. So I just went to, I don't know, a forum. They're like, well, here's the official link. And then I went to Microsoft's page. I just went to their official key redemption link, and it worked. And I'm like, okay, let's use this.
So
why risk it?
Yeah. So I actually have like some breaking stuff in terms of breaking news, personally. And then I emailed you about this, and I just want to bring up for a brief, just to mention it, because it is a 0-day vulnerability that impacts pretty much anybody who banks through audio. Anyone who has an audio banking system, which is pretty much everybody.
I don't know what that means. What, an audio banking?
You call a number and they say, "Hey, check your balance. You have to enter your credit."
Interesting. Yeah, I don't do that because I'm under the age of 50. But
so it mainly impacted one bank in particular, and that bank. And I'm trying to work with them on it to first. Try to communicate with them and try to get resolved.
It's up to you if you want to say who they are.
I don't want to say who they are just because it needs to be closed down first before I reveal that. The process, and this is where where you're vulnerable. When you do the automated system, all you enter is your bank account number and the last 4 digits of your social, or your as you have an LLC, or other people who have LLCs. I can't remember. It's it's like the equivalent of a social security number, but for businesses. Anyways, so that last 4, if they validate you with the last 4 of that as a method to get into the balance.
Yeah.
The way that basically is a vulnerability is because with that access, I could link it up to, say, a online transaction page. Or I could make a wire transfer, or not a wire transfer, an ACH transfer.
Are you saying it's because they're recording you saying your social security number?
Well, no. So because you enter just your account number, which does get leaked, and you enter just the last 4 digits of your social, which also gets leaked a lot, and it also businesses have that information out there because they have to pay people. Because that's how they validate it, I can see the account balances, I can see transactions. And so, like, for instance, with E-Trade, how they validate to link an account is they send an amount over to the account. And so do other websites do this, but E-Trade's a good example of this. Once you get those amounts, you can then verify that account. And now it's verified, and now you can start transferring money legitimately. In the instance when I found this, the reason I know this is because a person I determined later on was a scammer. and who stated they would make me an authorized user to the account. So by all standards, what I did was technically legal by my perception. If I believed them legitimately and I believed that they were making me an authorized user, I would technically have the right to do this. However, the only thing that actually stopped me was that this actually was a business account, someone's business account, and they actually never knew that I had actually attempted a transfer. And that, now I will say I did that. Technically, it's completely legal. I can technically do that because they have given me the information completely and offered to give me money, offered to transfer money, and as well as basically offered to make me an authorized user. Because of those various things, even though they did not have rights to the account, anyone else who wanted to do that legitimacy could do that. However, in this scammer's perception, he could do this without illegally. He could do it illegally. He could just do it without authorization from the accountant. As a matter of fact, him giving me this information is illegal because it's fraud. He's claiming to be this business or associated with this business. He's claiming to have this money, and he's claiming to give me this money. And the scam is that he wants your account information so he can deposit an electronic check, which is what he was saying, but which is why it's technically legal, because he was saying he was going to give me money. And so I was testing it to see how far this would go. And it goes to the point where it will attempt to make a transfer with the amount of information I have. Now, I won't say every bank is vulnerable. My bank is not, because it asks for a PIN number. If your bank actually asks for a PIN number, you're fine, you're safe, because this can be changed and it's also private. That information also doesn't leak, your PIN number, because it's all that tends to be encrypted. Your social security number and stuff like that. That like who was the main?
Was it Equifax?
Yeah, Equifax. So Equifax had a lot of people's information leaked, and my brother was actually affected by that. But essentially, your account information by other company businesses can get leaked all the time. It does all the time, and your last four does get leaked all the time. And if a bank verifies you with just those two pieces of information on the automated system, someone can link it up, and someone can transfer your money. And there's nothing you can do about it unless you can prove that it was an illegitimate transfer. Because an ACH transfer has to be returned by the originator.
Right. I mean, that's how money's supposed to work.
Yeah. And so the reason I bring this up is because I don't know who would find this more interesting. But to me personally, I want to get this to everyone, as many people as I can, because it is something that can affect a lot of people. And it's really, really scary how much that actually can affect so many people, and how you could lose everything, even if you didn't give anybody anything.
Right. So are you advising to just not use that form of verification, though?
I would advise that banks change the verification to just PIN numbers, that they could set up for those kind of transfers a actual PIN. So like you have your checking account PIN number, you're with your debit card, and then you can also have a ACH check or ACH PIN number. So that way the system, because it all gets electronically processed anyways, the system just verifies, oh, that is your PIN. Therefore, this is a legitimate transaction. Because if that type of system exists, I could never have actually initiated, regardless of the information I got.
Yeah, the fact is, social security numbers were never meant to be used as some kind of, I guess, what you called a human private key. They were never meant to be used that way. And the fact is that the way to have good security is just to have a simple password that's not obvious, that you can remember, and then redundancy, whether it's two-factor authentication or a few other measures that are easy to remember, that you aren't overly complex. Like, so for instance, for a customer I work with to log into their supplier portal, I need to they change the password every month. and they require me to do a 16 character password that has special characters, numbers, capital, like everything you can imagine. And so it's, if you're going to make me change this every month, I don't know what to tell you. I'm going to use a password generator. Like I can't remember 100 passwords. I have like 10, maybe 5 to 10 passwords I legitimately remember that I use often. And I separate them by tiers of security. So for instance, for my Bitcoin keys, I've never written them down, but I know what that password is. I'll never forget it. Mm-hmm. And I have ways of like referencing it if I did forget it, which was nerve-wracking when I did need to remember it once. But you know, and that's like the highest tier, right? And then below that's like banking and credit cards. And then below that, I'll have maybe a password that I've used forever that I don't care for stupid emails. And then an even dumber password for like Netflix. Because if they hack into Netflix, it's like, okay, I'll just change my password. You know, and it's like you have all these different tiers, and like you want redundancy, maybe two-factor authentication. And you want the password to be, you should not allow people to make their password, or like you said, A, B, C, D, E. But when you require people to have like a 20 character password with all these different things, they're not going to remember that. And that's going to cause them to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And there's no way to have perfect security. It's called responsibility. Yeah. People need to be responsible for their passwords.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, with security, you don't actually have to make it with password security and stuff like that. I worked in my past, and here's some of my actual history. I worked for the government. And so we actually have a PIV verification system, a PIV card or a CAT card, common access card, is what those stand for. A private identity verification is literally what those things stand for. And so you slip it in, it checks it validates the card, it checks for certificates and verifies itself, and then you enter a PIN. So this is the type of things, and the PIN's just a short digit PIN. It's not a terribly long thing. But when you start out with an account, you do need a password and that kind of stuff, until you get your PIV card or CAT card. But that's the thing, is that when it comes to security, there's different ways to do the same thing, and it doesn't require a huge password to secure the account. You can have like something on yourself. Like for instance, I have on my phone, there's a hold on, I'm gonna pull it up 1 second.
Well, while you're pulling it up, I'll say this too. Like for the example I gave, the 16 character password, you're not stopping brute force attacks with a 16 character password. Like you could have stopped at 8. No known computing device, as long as the password's good, is going to be brute force. I mean, 16, like this is the hilarious to think that you need that. To need more than 10 even. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, but I have a ping ID, for instance, in order to access certain sections of the job I currently have to connect to like a VPN or something. I had to use that, or certain pages, because it requires you to log in. But I still don't have to use a terribly long password, but it requires me to verify that, hey, you are requesting access to this page. Move your finger up. So literally flip a switch to verify on your phone that you're
I've seen that
access.
before. Again, and I've seen that on some Bitcoin exchanges where they actually make you do a thing like that you're not going to replicate easily.
Yeah, exactly. And so these are two-factor authentication methods. It can be something you have, something physical you have, something you know, passwords, and also there's like somewhere you are. It's like in the A+, they have a bunch of these different ones they list. But if a company is hoping that your password is like 16 digits and therefore that keeps you safe, if the hash file gets out, well,
exactly,
tough time. And if the hash file is in the clear with the passwords, which is even worse than if than even having complicated passwords. If the hash file is in the clear and not peppered, then you've got a bigger problem than worrying about how long your password is. So
yeah, and I don't know who makes this decision. I would almost assume it may have came from some kind of breach, and then someone who doesn't understand the tech told IT, you just have to do this, and they thought that made it better. And again, I'm going to make a gun reference and I do this a lot too, because it's pretty open now. I like guns, but like there was this period in the 80s where they made better and better body armor, but they didn't have the material science to make it light. So it's like, yeah, I mean, this can block, a high-powered rifle, but if it weighs 80 pounds, the soldiers don't wear it into battle. And so this body armor is useless. It is useless if they're not going to utilize it. When you make these overly complicated passwords, and at least from what I've seen in studies, ones that you have to update every month, people aren't going to use passwords they remember. They're going to write them down, store them in email addresses, and those can be hacked. Or there can be password generators that are compromised. And you just need to trust that people aren't stupid. I don't know what to tell you. Like, you just need to, like, maybe you require 8 characters and at least one of them has to be a number. But after that, just what are you wasting your time with?
Yeah. Well, like, for instance, I actually have on my phone, like, my own personal security to my phone that has access to everything. That would be me. I use a PIN number. Now, the PIN number is actually pretty long. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But it's just a PIN number to get into my phone. I also use fingerprint.
Right. To get in my phone, you need a PIN number, then a fingerprint to use the apps. And if you combine that with,
Well, I have a fingerprint, retinal scanner, but if I wanted to unlock my phone without those things, it's I'm going to count how many digits it is. It's a 16-digit PIN number, actually. And it's just numbers, though. So
you can remember it.
Yeah, I can remember.
You don't have to use a hashtag and a caret up sign.
But that PIN number, that actual number sequence could never be like brute force. You could never brute force it in. And so something that simple can secure your system. But for instance, in your case, if they wanted to secure it, just get HID to make cards for everybody and have them have an RFID chip that plugs into their computer. It's just one of those things that drives me nuts, that people try to do really complicated things to secure themselves. And all that does is just wear down system resources, but doesn't actually secure the network. There are more easier ways to make complicated security.
Right. Well, And so now this is where, unless you want to have something else to say, but I think I'm going to move on to another subject.
Yeah.
So, the original thing, right? And so I think I'm going through kind of my notes here. I think we've established you work. Well, what type of company do you work for? Do you want to say that?
I work for a contracting company. I'll say, if you post a link to the page that talks about like the vulnerabilities and stuff, it's fine. Like, who I work for is fine. Like, I even told my boss about this interview, so
okay,
they were fine with it. They're actually happy because they like the fact that, hey, you're a pretty swell person, so you seem like you could.
We'll see. I haven't decided yet.
I mean, come on, man. I'm trying my best.
I'm just kidding.
I work for the client that I'm contracted to is that the company contracts with is Aruba, which is owned by HPE. I actually do want you to post the link to the security vulnerabilities to see, so that way people can see.
No, I'll make it the top link in the notes.
So that way people can see, what does a networking company, the second largest networking company, actually think about these kind of vulnerabilities, and should people be worried about them when they have certain network and set up, and what concerns they should have. Again, I'm representing myself, not my company, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to touch on this too. These vulnerabilities are serious. I think I'm one of the few tech channels that keeps hammering, like, you've probably noticed, like, guys, seriously, everyone I'm talking to, and I mean everyone, says this is a big deal. I want to add to it too. I'll give everyone a snippet here. And this is my own company. I just got an email 2 days ago that they're rebooting their servers because they're overloaded for just basic email distribution.
Yeah.
And it's very clear to me it's because of these vulnerabilities. They didn't say it in the email, but it's clear to me that's what they're referencing, especially because near the end they say we're ordering more processors as quickly as possible to scale up the load. I'm like, I know what this is. Now it's affecting email servers.
Yeah.
Like, that's how bad the performance hit is. And to the people that say it's not a big deal, like, it can sound esoteric and like an edge case to hack, but it's not if you're a company. And it might not be for your personal stuff either, guys, but if you're a company, this is like, it's centralized. What info can you get from hacking any company with more than 3,000 employees. Probably a lot of stuff you can use to make money.
Yeah, people's computers or personal computers, if they get pushed out a Windows fix or a fix for these vulnerabilities, you don't get a choice which ones you implement. As in, they'll just push out a wide patch to fix them. And because they don't want their system vulnerable, otherwise they'll be liable. Like Microsoft could be liable for that if they don't fix it, because they know about the vulnerability and it's been talked about and that kind of stuff. Like, for instance, Zombie Load. People can buy personally the enterprise version of Windows. Everybody can. I bought it myself because it's a useful thing to use virtualization and connect to your computer remotely, especially when you're out and you have to do work. In Aruba's side, and this is the part that you should take away from those briefs over the vulnerabilities. It says specifically that they are examining these fixes to see to weigh whether or not they are going to negatively impact the client on a resource side because of how much stuff you have to turn off. So they aren't subject to certain vulnerabilities, but the vulnerabilities themselves are still worrisome for Intel and those parts because a lot of server companies and server hardware distributors use those components. They are worrisome on the fact that they will reduce the ability, like you were talking about, to do certain functions, and that's what's going to turn away customers from what we're selling to customers. And basically give business to other companies that have figured a way to not have to turn off those functions and hinder the stuff well. But what companies have done instead is, and this goes to the top levels, just to say how wide people are doing this. For Zombie Load, they stopped using Hyper-V altogether. And they just went to virtual vSphere or other applications that do not use hyper-virtualization as of right now, or VMware or anything like that. So they're just going to different companies, and that's an example of where it hits the hardest is when your company gets ousted, because if they use that function anymore, it opens them completely to monitoring vulnerabilities, and that's the worst.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. This is kind of random, but it's like, why do you think these are popping up in Intel's architecture? And I'll say first, I mean, I think a lot of people say like, well, fanboys will say it's because Intel's stupid, and then they'll say these other things too, like, oh, well, it's because they were cheating with performance. And my opinion is it's neither. It's just, look, this is an old architecture. Yeah. Usually you switch CPU architectures every, 4 to 6 years. Intel's been basically using the same thing for over 10. And if you do that, you give anyone any device and they'll find a weakness in it. If you give them 10 years, it doesn't matter what you give them. They'll find out this weird trick they can do.
Yeah. Well, I'm a pessimist when it comes to companies.
Okay.
Like the whole Volkswagen thing.
I'm usually an optimist. The Volkswagen one will make you a pessimist.
Yeah. So I tend to people go, why attribute to malice where you contribute to ignorance, or you contribute to
Volkswagen was an ignorance. I work in the automotive industry. I'll let you know some stuff if you want. It was not ignorance.
Yeah, exactly. So it's malicious, is because the cost benefit analysis tends to be cheaper. You talk about this all the time, where NVIDIA can't just switch and take out parts of their infrastructure of their GPUs.
Their architectures, I do think NVIDIA has a lot of hat tricks for getting better performance, or should I say, better performance we measure, because it depends what performance you're measuring. If you're just measuring frame rate, or to give them credit, frame times, they do well at that.
So that's actually what I was going to go to, because if you look at like Cortex's videos, and I know you had him on, and he's a great guy. I like watching his videos too. I watch all you guys' stuff. And this is why I get concerned about certain things, and why I talk about it all the time. We talk about it all the time. But when it comes to Cortex and the video I was watching where he was showing and he referenced another person's video, I can't remember who exactly it was, but basically how in NVIDIA, in order to get those numbers, they were literally taking out parts of the video.
Tech Yes City did a good video on it.
Tech Yes City, that's who it was. So that's who he was referencing. It was basically because they're doing that, and they're the leader of graphics, and so they have to keep pushing those frame rates and always be the highest, because that's the thing that people don't get, is that when you're at the top, it's really easy to fall if you don't keep those things up. And this is where my pessimism comes in.
It's a good comparison, actually, to Volkswagen.
Yeah, is they'll do the cost benefit analysis, and they're not just doing like how much the parts cost, because that's the easy numbers. You can always go, oh, it costs this much. But in terms of scandal, in terms of if we do a recall, people will not trust our brand anymore. If we don't keep giving this high numbers, and this is why I think Intel sticks to this architecture. It's a good architecture. It does a lot of good things. It's old.
Almost killed AMD.
Yeah, exactly. When they were trying to, and this will correlate with the sort of like, it's sort of ignorance part, malice. It's a combination of both. It doesn't, that's the thing, is these aren't mutually exclusive. You can have a gambler fallacy. You can just keep going all in on this. And the way I'll put it best to give Intel at least a little bit of benefit of the doubt is you know how what their target was for the 10 nanometer, how they were shooting for like what was it, 20%, or they were going for I can't remember exact IPC gain. They were trying to do double or something.
What I remember from Intel's 10 nanometer targets was over double the density. I don't remember the exact number. It was like 2.13, or it was like an insane in density increase. And then they were also going to go for
2 times.
I don't remember IPC, but they were going for like everything, right? Like if we look at, to give an example to people, if you look at TSMC's 7 nanometer to their 16, it's like they wanted 80% more density and 50% higher performance, or maybe, and what all things the same. Again, it's either 50% higher clock speeds or double the density. Usually people choose a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And and Intel's was insane. It was like an insane shrink they were going for some reason too. And I think that they would agree with us by now. I don't know why we insisted on that.
Yeah. Well, what I would say is that because of that target, that transition, so that new part, and I don't know anything in the back of the scenes, but that new part could contain the fixes for the security issues too, because of the more room, more space, therefore you can insert and the more power, therefore you can insert a physical hard solution to fix it. Fix the zombie load, to scan for the threading, to make sure arbitrary code. I don't remember what AMD's solution is.
I don't either.
But I know they do have a hardware solution that's in part of the architecture. It scans the CPU. It actually scans the CPU for stuff that's injected into it. And here's where it comes back to malice, is that Intel and AMD both knew this at the time, way before any of this stuff came out. They both were aware. That's why
Intel knew way before.
Yeah, that's why AMD they actually talked about this, and you can see Lisa Su's quote. She actually does state that that's why they actually targeted to create a hardware solution to fix this. And so that's where it becomes malicious. And this is why nobody should be a fanboy of any company. Companies are not your friend.
No.
And there's no bigger sign of that than CEOs of Goldman Sachs and every other company signing a document stating, well, maybe profit shouldn't be the only thing we focus on. Don't get me wrong. That's good for business, but it's bad for everybody else if all they focus on is profit. Because in the long term, that's how you lose everything.
And I do need to comment on that because I'm constantly accused of being an AMD fanboy, except on the AMD subreddit where they hate me more than anywhere else. An insane phenomenon I'm starting to understand.
Yeah.
Right, because some of my videos, especially some Zen 3 stuff, but I have another Zen 3. Yes, that's right. Another Zen 3 video, everybody, coming out where I talk about what AMD's priorities are, what's being said about what they're working on. And people are saying now, well, they're changing this. I thought AMD was my friend. And I'm like, guys, AMD was never your friend. They're a business. The only reason I report on AMD a lot now is because they're doing interesting stuff. And by the way, I've got like 4 Intel videos I'm working on. I know Adore just did an Intel video. Like Intel's working on some pretty cool stuff now too. And the reason I don't do a lot of NVIDIA videos is because like they're not doing anything. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
Like it's just a bigger card. That's their guys, big leak coming out. Another bigger card next year, I'm sure. Like that, and that's why it's not because I'm a fanboy. And you should never think AMD is your friend because they're certainly not.
Yeah, Lisa Su is doing great, Ed. But if she was your friend, do you think she would have reacted that way to that Lisa Su doll, like the superhero Lisa Su doll that she got during the launch of Ryzen 2? Like, I
didn't see that.
Yeah, it was. It's just you could check it out during the actual.
I think I've heard of it, but I don't remember the details.
They did later on show off the doll after she found out it was from a friendly company, actually, but instead of a fan. But that's basically how they I can't remember who the spokesperson of AMD is, the guy who was on stage with her, handed it to her, so saying it's from fans. Basically it's the super Lisa Su super hero thing. I can't remember what it's called exactly.
Yeah, I see that a lot too, and I want to be clear, I saw her at Hot Chips, which was really cool.
Yeah,
right. And I will say she has a presence. She walks in the room. It's kind of like some of those people you see, like examples I would give, or, well, I won't give examples, but like some of the biggest directors, comedians, and politicians, they just walk in a room and you go, oh, this guy's in charge or she's in charge. And it's like, there's something about her where it's like, oh, this is a competent person. There's something about how she walks and talks to people. It's very deliberate.
No,
she's not your friend. Yeah, she might be a nice person, but she's not your friend. Yeah. Her job's to make AMD money.
And she is a genuinely nice person. She's a good person. The difference is like, it's not her fan. The fans of AMD is not the same as an actual friend of the person. Yeah, networking wise, in terms of consumer, the thing I will tell people is like, your network will only run as fast as your CPU, as your hard drive, as your, you have like gigabit Ethernet ports, but then you have like a dual core Pentium processor. You're not going to be able to download everything.
No,
even if you're getting a gigabyte. And
I'm noticing that more and more, by the way, with some of the servers I've been using and like game downloads. Like Steam servers are insanely fast. I've noticed the CPU load on my quad core is starting to get pretty high there.
Yeah, and so this is where AMD making standard 8 cores or 6 cores is actually really useful. It's just like the PlayStation, where it had extra cores for downloading stuff, and then you were still playing games and it was running in the background. And that's like why Qualcomm is getting so much profits. ARM is getting a lot of profits is due to the fact that they're running an entire processor unit to do your whole network. But as far as communication through the system, it still has to download and put that data somewhere.
Yeah.
And if you're not running an SSD and you're not running at least a 6 core, this is why anybody who plays games, and people are like, oh, I can work with Intel 4 core. It's going to be fine forever and ever.
Or 6 cores, no hyperthreading.
Yeah, no hyperthreading will become a problem because as soon as you load all those 6 threads, you're done. You can't download anything from the internet. Anybody who plays games has to download something. There hasn't been any game that, even if it comes in Blu-ray, which has 100 gigabytes at this point, that with the new PlayStation 5 will have 100 gigabytes. You're still going to have day one patches that you have to download.
Unfortunately, probably, yeah.
Yeah, and that's just going to be more and more common. And this leads into why like things like Stadium and 5G and all that kind of stuff is actually crucially important, because we're actually getting to the point where wireless connection is catching up with direct connection. So that's what the importance of 5G is that if you look at 4G, it's only 5 gigabits per second. It's like 5 to 10 gigabits per second, if I remember right. And then you're going up to a factor of 1,000 to 4,000, because it's theoretically up to 20 gigabytes. Bits, 20 gigabits. Sorry.
And I've noticed this too, because there's 5G Wi-Fi that's been pretty standard on decent routers for a while now.
Well, no, sorry, that's two different things. 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, which is
I should say 5 gigahertz.
Yeah, so 5 gigahertz versus 5G are two different things. But
correct. Correct. Yes, I should have said 5 gigahertz, and I noticed that it's a different band. It allows you to split up. Right. For instance, I'll have my devices that don't need it. Like my mining rigs, I run all of them on the 2.4 gigahertz because it doesn't use any bandwidth and it doesn't need to be low latency. It just needs to connect and be stable. And 2.4 gigahertz, because it's a lower band, right? It allows it to go through walls better. The connection's better. I just want that. But for gaming, 5 gigahertz is substantially better, and I have noticed. I game over Ethernet still, but like, and this was a thing that is new to me because it's like, no, over 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, I can game, and I do notice the little hiccups using 2.4. I mean, I remember all the way back when I was in college, I had a big Killzone clan. We play in tournaments, and I was like, why am I sucking in these battles all of a sudden? And I noticed it's because I wasn't using Ethernet. And just, even though it was dedicated servers, just using Wi-Fi was like making me miss sometimes. And it was ridiculous.
Yeah. Like I'm on 4G LTE and it's actually up to 180 megabits per second. So that's good though. The LTE, of course, is a different one than just plain 4G. But because it gets up to 20 gigabits per second, what that allows you to do is, that's just the signal that goes out, but that allows everybody to start doing Ready Player One amount of data. So the thing about Ready Player One is that in order to do that, you have to transmit so much data to make it look good that it ends up into hundreds of, it's like 4K levels of data transfer. So you're transferring data, 4K gaming live. I can't remember what Google was saying you needed for Stadium 4K, but essentially that. So about 1440p.
Well, it's very simple,
4K.
right?
Yeah.
How much bandwidth can an HDMI cable carry?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now think about if it's streaming, they're going to do all types of compression whenever they can because they have to. But think about that. You're not going to get HDMI quality streaming until we can download HDMI bandwidth.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where 5G becomes extremely important, is because we're catching up to it's catching up the physical hardware to the wireless hardware.
Right.
And
let me ask this too, just to take a step back for everyone.
Yeah.
What is a G? What was 1G?
Okay, so it's the G's are just generations in terms of cell phones. In terms of,
but I think they market it in commercials almost like it's HDMI 3.0, which I guess you could argue is a comparable thing because it really doesn't mean anything. It's just a new standard. But I think people think it's like upgrading a certain type of technology. It's not really, right? It's just a set of specs that you have to meet to be 5G, right?
Correct. So it has to have the ability to process the theoretical limits. So like there's certain.
So what was 1G? Do you remember?
I have. It's like kilobits at that point, but we never, like, data was always, I think, 2G and then 3G and then 4G massively. Like, because
I don't know
when you go to
1G, did, I've used 2G, and 2G was like you could read emails and websites sometimes.
Yeah. And because if you go back that far, most people didn't have cell phones. So it was very, very, but it was very limited and basic. But It's just generational. So the bandwidth signals that are allowed and the way you're connecting and how it distributed. 3G did actually change from 2G because 3G allowed segmentation of the channels. So like you have a lane of the highway and you have a semi truck that comes through, and then you have a mini car. Well, that a mini car will only need a certain section, and so that's actually what changed. And in terms of mobile data has been using that for a long time. Wi-Fi 6 actually just is the adoption of that type of technology. So that's actually a change for everybody, and this would allow people to wirelessly game like hardcore is what Wi-Fi 6. Well,
I started being able to technically game on a 3G hotspot, but it had to be a good one, and it would be like only a game like Age of Empires. You're not doing this on
yeah, exactly. Because the 3G,
but it was the start.
Yeah, 3G is in kilobits per second, and you can game a little bit. You're just not going to have
on the game.
Yeah, you just won't have anything high def running. When you get to 4G, that's when you can play videos just fine without issues. You can do most things without issues. And like I just said, it's 100 and something on LTE.
So what's the difference between 4G and LTE? Because I actually don't know.
That's just how much data can be processed. So
okay, so how much better? So let me ask this question: how much better is LTE than 4G compared to 4G to 3G?
Well, the download speed is like 5 to 10 megabytes per second for just 4G. I can't remember the actual values for 3G, but it's in kilobits.
I don't remember either. It was, again, it's enough to play games, so I would imagine I think it was like 256 or it was something.
Yeah, it was 200 something, 256. It's real low. It's like DSL. But it's still.
And don't hate us. I was guessing, guys. I'm not saying it was exactly that.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know for certain either because I don't have to deal with this.
It's what it felt like to me, right?
Well, it is about that because the generations are a factor of a 10 to 100 difference between. And just like, for instance, USB is a factor of 10 to 100 times difference. It was a huge difference with Bluetooth and stuff like that. Those change. Those get really big downloads when it comes to those generations. But the thing with 5G and the thing that's important about Wi-Fi 6 and 5G, which are two things that are coming through, and I'll also talk about what concerns people have with 5G.
We'll get to that in a second.
After this, after like discussing what the benefits are. So you have like Quest, and this will all tie together with what AMD is doing and what ARM is doing. And so you had Cortex who talked, and this is where I got really impressed with ARM and themselves when they were trying to do the basically make single-threaded workloads become multi-threaded. That is insanely good optimization. But I'll just try to stick to the simplest parts. What AMD is doing and what you declared that they could do in laptop, which I believe, and I actually am looking at that too, because how much energy is reduced with the efficiency, 10% efficiency increase with energy on Ryzen 3, but then Ryzen 4 and all that kind of stuff will increase that even more.
Yeah.
What the PlayStation 5 is capable of. Let's just assume the graphics power is equivalent to a 1070. Even though
it's going to be substantially more than that.
It's going to be substantially more. Given the fact that it can run 4K at 120 hertz, if that is true, more.
This is a whole conversation. I'd say, do you want me to say what I think the PS5 is again, just to recap?
Sure.
Okay, so let me back up here. So fixed function, built-in ray tracing hardware, which has been rumored for a long time. I'm not sure what Xbox's implementation is, but guys, they're going to have something similar probably. Like they're probably going to be similar. It's going to have fixed ray tracing hardware. It's going to have an 8-core Zen processor. Everything says 3.2 gigahertz, and there's a lot of reasons to actually go with that speed. It actually has to do with DRM with PS4 backwards compatibility.
Yeah.
But And so and I do think there's going to be a PS5 Pro and a PS5 base, and we can get into that whole argument. But the fact is, they're targeting. I'm not going to argue about what it's going to use for the memory bus. It could be 256. I think it will be on the base, and I think the Pro is going to have between 320 and 384-bit. But again, it's semantics. The fact is, they're targeting bandwidth. I would say in between a 2080 Ti and a Radeon 7. They want that level of bandwidth, and it's going to be RDNA 2.0.
Yeah.
And this is a good conversation with Paul on the podcast, actually. He points this out, that it's like they're targeting 13 to 15 teraflops, which is RDNA. So that's 50% more performance than at 5700 XT.
Yeah.
So what I've always said is, and it's from 2018, guys, it's not going to be that expensive to make that kind of performance in 2020. I don't know what to tell you. It's just not expensive to make that. It's just they're selling it for a lot. And the PS5 is going to target that level of performance because that's what it takes for 4K 60, that level of performance. So why would Sony not target that? If you're making a next-gen console, you really think you're going to sell people a 1800p instead of 1440p or something?
Yeah.
Like, no one's going to buy that. So they're targeting 4K 60, and that means a 2080 Ti. That means an 8-core processor with a backup processor. That means custom ray tracing. And the other stuff they're talking about, and this is where I kind of try to get off of my diatribe and lead back into you, is they're going to do custom ray traced sound for 3D sound. Also, supposedly going with a specific type of wireless technology that they're going to use for VR is a rumor. And also just for Wi-Fi gaming.
Yeah. So the thing with that is that if they adopt, say, WiGig as the standard that they use for that, that theoretical throughput is 40 gigabits per second. You have a lower end version, and it'd be cheaper for like standardization. But this is the thing that people don't realize about VR. There is 1 million on Steam alone.
Yeah, that's enough for VR.
Yeah,
40 would be 5 gigabytes.
Well, it's less than that if you wanted actual like solid VR. It's way less than that. You have to think in terms of like how much Stadium declares 4K will cost in terms of bandwidth.
True. Yeah.
Is how much like the highest end, like we're talking index level VR, like or Pimax level VR. Bandwidth is required, but essentially for no latency, but you wanted to, no matter what, to always work really, really well while you're in that room. WiGig is really good for that because it has such a high throughput, but you can lower the specifications to have a lower end version of WiGig where you just go 1 gigabit throughput and you'd be still fine. But the thing is, because of what you're talking about with the processor units and the reduction in space for all that, this is where what's essentially you have the Quest, and people are like, "Oh, that's great." Actually, let me start over because what I was going to lead into was actually the PlayStation. The PlayStation 4 and VR is actually one of the largest VR distributors.
It's the biggest, most successful one.
Exactly. They outmask everybody. HTC Vive.
It's not even close.
Oculus
like
combined. Yeah, exactly. So this is where VR will now become mainstream, even though technically it's about mainstream when you have over 1 million VR headsets already sold.
Which I think they do now.
Yeah, they have 1 million, and that's Steam alone. That's actually.
They probably have more. Yeah,
that's just Steam headsets actually, which I have to check those figures. But
yeah, I don't remember what PSVR is. I want to say PSVR is like 3 million.
Yeah,
and something. And so again, so all of Steam uses 1 million.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what other. And I just like to be clear about this. It's like, I'm not a PlayStation fanboy. I'm just telling you the facts.
Yeah.
You can combine all other VR, and it's not half of PSVR.
Yeah. So the thing is, if you have it as just a video broadcast, so you don't need to have that much hardware inside the VR in order to just pick up the information from the device and display it. You can have a lower grade, and still have a high quality. Because it's just processing the images, and the images is being processed almost instantaneously without any delay, because you're just inches away from where it's receiving and sending it. But the thing is, what I was going to say is you have the Quest, but compared to what's theoretically possible with laptop-based CPUs and GPUs, APIs, based on what you're discussing, how powerful the API is. And this is what I was saying about, let's just assume for a second that it's a 1070 level performance, even though it's way
so
higher.
So it's an Xbox One X.
Exactly. A 1070, not in TI, because
there's a big difference.
Yeah. 1060, 6 gigabyte can run VR just fine. If you're running the Oculus or you're running Windows Mixed Reality, all those are fine because the minimum is 1050 Ti, by the way.
It is. It used to be a 1060 or 570.
1050 Ti is for Windows Mixed Reality if you want to run Windows Mixed Reality. But the Windows Mixed Reality is like fairly decent of an experience. It's one of the cheapest thing. Like if you're interested in VR but you don't want to spend a whole lot of money, get the Odyssey Plus. That's my recommendation because I use that. I use the Odyssey. I don't use the Plus, but that's because that didn't come out yet.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to try VR, I mean, there's cheap ways to try it. I'll just throw that out there. I think me and Dan talk about that a lot in the new Die Shrink. It's just like, Google Cardboard, a $20 headset that fits your 4K phone, your 1440p phone.
That's going to be rough, though. All I'd say, though, is it's very rough to do that. I had no friends who done that. If you want just a legitimate, all I'm saying is if you want a legitimate experience and you value consoles, so if you think a console is valuable because it costs about $300.
No, yeah, I'm talking about literally trying it for almost free.
Yeah. You could do that with your Google, your phone.
I don't recommend literally doing Cardboard though. I mean, come on, buy a $20 headset, guys.
Yeah, buy the mobility ones. They fit on better. They're more comfortable and they don't cost that much. But what I'm saying is if you actually want to get into VR, but you're not certain if you want to go full body or anything like that, or you don't care about full body will cost like $100 per tracker, which is way more than anybody should really spend for it. Unless you're dancing in VR constantly. And then you buy an additional one because you have to charge it and only lasts for 4 hours. It's not really worth it. There's also no space restraints when it comes to the mobility one. And then you have the Oculus S, which is exactly what Windows Mixed Reality people have been already situated with. We don't have base stations. So we're already used to it. It's not that big of a transition. It's because of the cost is $300. And if you wanted to start out, I would recommend the Odyssey Plus. The S is kind of just weird in its resolution. It's not as high quality as Odyssey Plus. I have to double check that, but if I remember right, it was slightly smaller and it's a single display. But the Odyssey Plus does get rid of like the screen door effect. Anyways, the point I was bringing up to just get back to the 5G and everything else. What 5G will allow, let's assuming the API on the processor is at 1070 for some reason, level of performance, you're going to be able to run the index level of performance, which is is like a 5K or whatever, because there's two monitors and they're all, the math, it's weird. You're at least a 4K, like dual, it's 2000 pixels or whatever. 4K display on that headset wirelessly. It has enough power in that processor unit, and the battery is such that you could just connect battery backup to it too, and basically play forever with index level of performance, index level of vision. And when I say that, if you look at MRTV's video, he actually takes screenshot images and compares side by side by different VRs, the quality of the image, and because of the throughput, 5G allows you to just go outside, connect to the internet, and have stadium 4K experiences with games on your headset because of how much processing power is actually packed into these CPUs. This is why what AMD is doing is actually fundamentally so important. Mobile processors is what the Quest use.
Let me say this. So, and maybe I can summarize it. It sounds simplistic and it sounds like marketing, but is this true? Just the reason 5G is a big deal is because this is when wireless, not just Wi-Fi though, right?
Yeah.
And you say 5G and Wi-Fi 6, right? Because they're kind of
they're coming out at the same time.
Yeah. So that's good. So the reason Wi-Fi 6 and 5G are a big deal is because this is the point where we basically get wireless to not be a bottleneck to bandwidth.
Exactly. Ever. So with Wi-Fi 6, what it allows is that you get to do the same thing you can do on your mobile phone, which is segment the network just for the chunk you need, basically, per device. And so,
which is very important.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me tell you.
Exactly. And with 5G, it's basically you're able to play and do anything you want with no limitations. There never will be a bottleneck because of how much data. And even on my 4G phone right now, it's like 100 megabits per second.
Right, because that's what I was like. I was like, why do I need more than this? But you're saying it's not just for maybe what you use it for. Yeah. It's just not a bottleneck anymore. And I think this is what everyone's screaming is what about latency?
Yeah, well, there won't be any latency, but mostly because, and this goes into the concerns that people have, but it's also required in order to have no latency. The towers will be pretty close to you, actually. The 5G towers will be stationed within the cities, pretty spread out throughout the city, which actually allows multiple places for you to draw off signal. And that's actually many of the it's a requirement in order to make it work. But it's also one of those things that actually is really beneficial because you'll have a lot of crossover area for that signal.
Well, these towers are going to be close to me.
Yeah.
That brings me to a reader mail question from Jacoby 6000. He writes in just like you can if you support me on Patreon. And he says, will 5G give me cancer?
The answer to that is absolutely not. Just as a short, direct no, to cut that off. And I'm not just confident in it. I know that for a fact. And the reason I know that for a fact is because if we look at ionizing radiation or radiation that actually causes cancer, it's in the gigahertz range, petahertz range,
right?
Which is substantially higher. The main thing that you need in order to cause cancer or in order to affect your cells is for it to actually move or manipulate the DNA or tissue. And as far as the waves go for Wi-Fi, which is in the 5 gigahertz range, and the thing I mentioned was something that FCC could allow, which is in the 50 gigahertz range. And that's the difference between Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi in general versus 5G is the fact that it can actually go up to higher bandwidths. Wi-Fi just, because it's cheaper, and that's the only reason, they use the free license ones. And that's why you're going to be in the 5 gigahertz range. I actually work where I work. We have 11 different access points. So Wi-Fi access points. You have Wi-Fi being broadcast at 5 gigahertz and 2.5 gigahertz. So if you do the math of that combination, it's at least up to 50 gigahertz constant collective exposure because they're all overlapping. And these devices are stadium quality devices, which means the area of effect is from my desk to almost 100 feet away. And that's one device. There are 11 that sit next to me. No, sorry. There's 8 coworkers that sit next to me. And so basically each one has 2. So there's 16 devices. And I'm not worried at all because I looked it up. I did my own research on this, and you can do the research. It's so low and the impact is so low, and the impact isn't ionizing. That's actually crucial for cancer to occur. is that it has to be ionizing. It has to cause movement and vibration in the cell and the DNA structure to knock out. Like if you do jumping jacks, for instance, that's more movement and vibration in your body than Wi-Fi causes. That's more disruption. The part that scares a lot of people is because it's invisible and it's waves and it's moving through you, it's penetrating through you.
And it is moving through you.
Yeah, and that scares people. But the truth of the matter is because of how big the waves are in comparison to ionizing radiation in terms of the distance between each one, which you can actually see that. It is possible to actually see that. It's just not going to hurt you. There's no reason to think it'll hurt you. And we have cell phones in our pockets. That's the thing is that we are, in terms of scientific community, they have a lot of materials that they can put wireless devices in, including your phone, and see if it moves the materials, the atoms, the molecules, any of that moves it, and have it completely isolated from the outward surrounding, have it stored, and see if that occurs. But there's not enough energy. If there was enough energy to cause disruption in your body, and I know people might say things like, "Oh, but the microwave can heat things up." Well, that's because it's at a certain resonance with water. But that doesn't cause the water to become radiated. It just gains heat.
Right. Like there's a difference between heat and, radiation damage.
Well, yeah, radiation or radioactivity. It technically is radiating heat energy, but that's different.
No, but right. And that's the problem is people hear radiating and they're like radiating and it's like, no, wait though.
Yeah, it doesn't have a half-life. You're not breaking down the water molecules.
My Radeon 7 is radiating heat into the air. That doesn't mean it's radioactive. Yeah. And I guess the two things I would say is, hey, you know what? If a bunch of people at Verizon and AT&T start getting cancer in a year, maybe start worrying.
Yeah.
But let's wait for that to happen first.
Yeah.
And second of all, I don't know what to tell you guys. There are radio waves and all different types of random frequencies being emitted from outer space into Earth, into your head constantly.
Yeah, there's background
That's how the
radiation.
universe works. And from the center of the Earth.
And the sun.
I mean,
you're getting way more radiation, ionizing radiation, actual ionizing radiation from the sun, because it can cause cancer, than you would ever get from Wi-Fi. You could your entire life that you're exposed to Wi-Fi will not equal even a portion of the amount of energy you would get reduced to by the sun in one day, because it's actually significantly a lot if you stand outside all day.
Well, we'll see. I'm waiting for you to get cancer.
And that's the point in which I will personally sue.
Hey, we'll do another podcast.
Yeah, I'll sue my own company.
William got cancer.
I got cancer. I'm dying. Run away from Wi-Fi. This
can be used as evidence. This is where he says he was told by the company publicly that he wouldn't get cancer, and then there you go.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that it's a very specific type of cancer, because what'll happen is your DNA will break down, so that I can actually legitimately prove that the cell phone or the wireless signal did cause my cancer. Versus I got cancer because of the environment I live in.
Yeah. So I have another reader mail question here, and this comes from Carbon Cry, and he asks, when will we finally replace Ethernet? And he says here, no, but seriously, are we ever going to upgrade the interface we use for physical connections? I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
We do all the time, actually. There's Cat 6. You have...
right.
And then... So that's the thing is that if you look at an actual server, and you could just Google a server, there's... that's what fiber optic connections are. They are a transition to a more robust connection than copper. It's just in short distances, it might be cheaper just to run with copper, because the copper has been there for a very, very long time. The only thing I would say is that it would take an entire company or industry to design a fiber optic from the router, from the network box, which is where you get your internet from, to your computer, or from the network box to the router to the computer, completely fiber optic in order for that to change. You have to have it all the way through, because it has to transition from, and that's the thing, copper can transmit a lot of data. It actually can go up to terabits per second. If you look at the cable conventions, they actually show off that all the time. So, not being able to get to 1G, oh yeah, yeah, really, Comcast. Apparently, you can't pull it off, but you can apparently pull off a terabyte data transfer at the convention.
It's too hard.
Yeah, it's too money losing. Yeah. But yeah, and that's the thing, is if you want, but you don't really, and that's the thing, you don't really need to transition though. There's no real reason to. And as far as from your router to your computer, and the reason I say that is because from your router to the computer, there's not that much interference, because there's not that much distance. There's not that much distance in between. But if you want to talk about what you can go to, Wi-Fi 6 is actually the thing that allows you to perfectly game fine, because you'll have your own dedicated segmentation of the network without Ethernet connection. And I'm on my home Wi-Fi, and it gets up to 200, and I'm on gigabit internet, by the way. It gets up to 200 megabits per second for my phone download. So with Wi-Fi 6.
Yeah, I assumed you were going to say that eventually, right? It just won't even be necessary. And in fact, I can envision personally a future where wireless will be faster than what we can even do physically, potentially, right?
That's where 5G comes in, is when I talked about the theoretical throughput of 20 gigabytes. Do you know what USB 4 theoretical speed is?
Oh, no, I don't remember. I can guess, but I'm not going to.
I can tell you. It's 40 gigabytes. So that's if you times that by 8, that's how many gigabits are coming through. Which is 320. 320 gigabits per second. Why wireless cannot? There's a certain point where you have to get to a hertz range where the distance is too short. So that's, or you have to basically do point to point, like just have a laser that transmits the data.
Right. That's an option.
Yeah. Yes. That is an option. You can also have like LEDs that transmit data at gigabits per second. That's also a thing. Linus Tech Tips cover that. But essentially, when you're reaching 20 gigabits per second, that is a replacement for direct connection. You don't need a wired connection in order to transfer huge data packets or programs, because you can do that instantly. Yes, wired will always be faster, technically, because of the USB 4 standard. It is 40 gigabytes, because direct connection used gigabytes instead of gigabits. But the thing is that unless you're transferring a terabyte, that doesn't matter. If you're playing games, or
it's getting very close at this point to the limits of physical. Even it's not technically next to it, but effectively, whatever you would be able to do with this, you'll be able to do with this. So who cares?
Yeah. So just to give you an example, Stadium 4K at 60 hertz was 100 and something megabits per second, if I remember right. You can look up their chart and see that, but it was like 10 for HD or something, take megabits dedicated for HD. And so if you're at gigabits, then there's nothing that'll touch it. There's nothing that'll use the whole entire line. And you can segment that off for everybody. Everybody will be able to play games just fine. They won't notice any delays. So then companies will then make the transition. And that's basically what will happen to Ethernet, and everything else will just become wireless. And
right, because it sounded like a long shot to me, kind of to try to bring it full circle. At least why I think most people were interested, or at least why I was about talking about 5G, as I heard. And we don't know. I'm not going to confirm that they're going to do wireless VR with the PS5.
Yeah.
But it certainly is a lot of suggestions they're directly hinting.
Yeah. And like I said, all in the full circle, all of direct connection VR experience becomes possible with what AMD is doing, with what WiGig is capable of. And that's in 20 gigabits per second as well, or 40 gigabits per second, actually, for the theoretical throughput for WiGig. It is short distance, but it is...
and by the way, while we were talking, I Googled this. There's a website I found that lets me calculate gigabits per second for different types of resolution bandwidth. And so I was like, well, so supposedly the PS5 for their new VR, and supposedly it's going to be able to use the old VR if you're a cheapskate.
Yeah.
But the new one's supposedly going to have 1440p per eye at 120 hertz is what they're targeting.
Yeah.
And so that's little less than 4K, actually. And when I look at that, that should add up to about a little, like, I think, would this be 31.8 gigabit per second, which based on what you're saying, there's room for now, and there just wasn't before.
Yeah. Now, as far as that goes, because the screens are smaller, and there's a lot of trickery that VR people do, you technically don't have to push that much stuff through.
No, I'm sure they won't.
Yeah.
But even theoretically, it seems like it's in the cards.
For WiGig, it is completely possible. There's a lot of wireless stuff you can do, completely possible, direct point to point. Though that has the problem of interference. But WiGig has a problem of interference if you get too far away or something gets into the controllers and everything else.
Yeah, and they won't launch it right away, right?
Yeah.
They're going to launch the PS5, get the exclusives out, get all the fanfare, and then they'll wait a year or two, and then this will be the next big push to make people buy stuff who didn't buy it already.
Yeah. Now, when I say all this stuff, I don't have any inside knowledge because I don't work for those companies, but I'm just telling you what is based on my knowledge of VR, based on my knowledge.
It's just logical, though, right? That's what we're saying.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to be able to do ray tracing games like Minecraft, but people, the thing is that people don't take VR that seriously, even though there's 1 million people who use it on Steam, and there's 3 million headsets that have been sold. That's a huge demographic.
That's why I say VR is here to stay.
Yeah.
It's still niche, but it's here to stay.
Yeah, and the thing is that you're going to be able to do such a high quality experience, and the point where your brain won't be able to distinguish a little bit between what you're doing and what you're feeling. So this could be a different video topic, but I actually studied for a little while what was something called phantom sense, which is something where you experience someone touching you in VR. Where, like I said, I played VR chat, and that's actually a very common phenomenon because your brain can't really decipher the difference between the two.
It'll add the senses for you, right, if you see it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's because it also has to do with alignment between the body of the avatar and yourself in the physical world. The more realistic the stuff becomes, the heavier that experience will be. So you can end up with a Tesla suit for free. So, and it gets pretty intense with that stuff. And the thing is, people are worried about VR because they're like, this isn't socializing. This is it's isolation, and you're by yourself, and this kind of stuff. And that's absolutely the opposite of the truth.
It's you can make both arguments.
Well, no, I actually have data to back up what I'm saying versus what people will criticize it about. I was running through VR chat, and there were hackers, and there are people who will crash your game, and stuff like that. And so people got together and responded to that by forming communities to target them to get them out of the game. and block them from the system entirely and help fix patches in order to do that. So it ended up being sort of the tribal response of you're messing with our family. And I even talked to the people who were doing this, said, why do you do this? And they responded, because I really care about this community and I hate anybody who makes the game unplayable. And I thought that's really interesting, because you also get a lot of people who will say things like, it's just online. and a lot of that comes through when people do stuff in VR chat. A lot of that comes through as far as what people will say. But that's not how it ends up working out, because you have people who make friends. You have people who form relationships. You have people who end up getting emotionally destroyed because they lost that friendship. And so that's how intense or the experience being face to face with people, technically, because you're face to face with a physical entity that has a face, has eyes, talks to you, moves around. It might as well be, it is another person on the other side, which is why when I talk to a lot of people and ask them, hey, do you look at the avatar's eyes?
Oh, yeah.
And when you're talking to somebody and then they say, yeah. And I go, I can't tell you're doing that. So why are you doing it? I can't see your eyes. I can see the avatar's eyes. And they go, I don't know. I just do it by habit. And that's because the brain at a certain level doesn't know the difference.
Yeah. And I've done that even in games that's not in VR, where someone will jump in front of me and I'll press a reaction like I'm blocking something. And I'm like, wait, why did I do that? That served no gaming function. And I just did a motion like I would in real life for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where I say the future is actually bright, because I saw communities form. I saw people becoming friends. I saw a lot of entertainment, a lot of money changing hands, a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. I'm not worried about the future, but it's a good point, because a lot of people are, right?
Yeah, they're worried about the disconnect between society. And I can personally inform people that society formed itself inside VR with these social games. And it doesn't matter the social game, and it doesn't matter the game anyways. People already know that communities form all the time in games like WoW and stuff like that. But when you get to VR, that's when it becomes actual human interaction, community level style reaction, tribalism, protectionism, and that kind of stuff, like natural kindness and honesty. Actually, that's the thing people get the most wrong about people on the internet. 99% of the time, people are actually very honest about themselves when they're talking to you.
Well, let me say this too, and I don't know if this is true of you. Well, I don't know. I don't know what your hobbies are.
Yeah.
Do you I don't know. Do you go walking? Do you go on hikes? Do you go camping? Do you have a dog? I'm just curious. I'm just asking.
I do all that. I had a pet. I actually run every day for an hour.
Mm-hmm. Have you been doing it? This outdoor activities, have you been doing it more or less lately?
I've been running more just because I want to lose weight. But
so I was listening, and I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get to this because actually I only have about another 5 minutes. But so listening to the podcast Sacred Symbols, they were talking about how the early internet. Oh no, it was Knockback. They were talking about the early internet. These are older people, maybe like 40 years old, and they're like, I used to go on the internet in the late 80s, early 90s to escape the real world. But now that everything's connected to the internet, I'm going outside more just to escape the internet.
Yeah.
And I think people know it's good for them. And I've gotten into camping recently, and I've gotten into, I walk more. I'm now running more often. And here's the thing. The more interconnected we get online, the more, hiking's on the rise. Millennials travel more than any other generation. They go hiking, and rock climbing is like exploding, this industry of rock climbing. And it's because people are going outside because they need to go outside. And if people are worried about VR, it's like, look, humans know what they need, and VR is just going to connect us more. And if we use it too much, we'll go outside more. We're probably just going to appreciate the outside more when we're outside, I think.
Yeah. And that's well, when it comes to VR, you'll be able to experience like the outdoors pretty well. But at the same time, because of the community aspect, with introverts, you don't like people. So the only way you can get away from people is going outside.
That's true now.
That's
true. So
that's what I think is the more corner of it, is that most gamers who most people who adopt the hobby because it's a way to escape, they adopt it because they're introverted and they want to get away from people. For me, because of the social games and because of the social complications and all that kind of stuff, yeah, I do actually stop playing VR for a good long while, and go outside and hang out. I will say this: I have met people who I've dated in real life from online. There's no shame in that, and that's
no. That's very common now.
Yeah, and there's no shame in being in VR, but people will get headaches, and not headaches because of observing VR for so long, but they'll get headaches because they're dealing with frustrating things, and it turns people off, and so they walk away from it. And like you said, people know what's good for them. There is negative repercussions from having negative relationships. Still, like if you're getting hurt by the system, people don't like that. It's just like the mouse and the door experiment, where the door shocks you every time you touch it. Eventually, you stop wanting to touch the door, and so people like myself will walk away for a good long while, and then they come back to that door to see if there's cheese.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cheese to be had, don't get me wrong, behind that door. But it does shock you every so often. But that's the thing I found most surprising. And when I didn't actually expect that. I actually expect a lot of people to have the general mindset that this is online, this is not real. Therefore, anything you do here, or any thing that's lost, or anything that's just stops or goes away, falls apart, people steal your stuff, whatever. Like your avatars, they download your avatar through the internet because it's all packets and data. That people are like, oh, it's just online, it's no big deal. Like people do with Twitter or whatever.
Well, yeah, but people do that on these other communication, I don't know, websites, because they're so removed. You're just typing. You're looking at an avatar. When I say avatar, I mean a picture or name.
Yeah.
It's not the same as VR. And in many ways, VR might solve our communications online issues, because if you use VR, you see them as humans again.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was getting at, is that you have the subtle motions and movements that you have when you meet people, like the hands go around and people do gestures all the time and stuff like that. And so that's where those communities started to form. That's why people cared so much when people steal other avatars, and then they get called out on that, because you're stealing a part of someone's work. You're stealing a part of the person. And so I think, from my perspective, I didn't go into that thinking that would actually happen. I thought the opposite. I thought it would be...
You always assume new technology is evil, just because I guess that's what we assume.
Well, I assume that the ideology that the internet, people have a lot of time with the internet, would carry through, which is it's online, therefore not real, which is not technically true at all. It's even when you're on Twitter talking to someone on Twitter, you're talking to another person, unless somebody did a program. But
so I guess the way I would put it succinctly,
yeah,
online hasn't mattered. It hasn't been real, but it is now.
Yeah, exactly. You could lose everything just by going online. In the real world, you can end up hurting someone physically in the real world. But emotionally, they can get impacted. But there's always been someone on the other side of that screen, just sitting there, just like you, talking to them. And that's what I try to emphasize the most with people who actually took that perspective in VR chat. They say, or in VR, I always say them, no matter what, just never forget, on the other side of that screen is physically someone standing there.
Yeah, and people even forget it. Well, just speaking personally, that I'm a real person.
Exactly. And you have feelings.
And it's like, and I am talking to them, and it's like, I don't know how this, I mean, I troll and I've flamed before, but Never to the extent I see some people do it, and I'm just like, you do realize these are real people, right?
Yeah. This is where people who are like trying to incite fights between two channels or something, and I heard about that,
yeah.
and I watched your video on that, and I was like, dude, stop trying to create drama. These are actual people who may be friends with each other. What are you doing? It's not like Spartacus. Are you not entertained?
My favorite thing on that is just how they'll say, did you see this one video? He called you stupid. And I'll be like, let me see. No, he didn't.
Yeah.
Like, you think I'm not going to watch the video before I...
Yeah.
Or did you actually think he called me stupid just because he didn't 100% agree with me? People are allowed to disagree.
Yeah. Yes. But if you can, feel free to put my Twitter handle, which is @theboom1, into the description if anyone wants to talk to me about like networking stuff, has any questions.
Yeah. I am it to me too after this over Skype, and send me that link too.
Yeah, I will. Because I don't mind like if people have questions and stuff, and like networking, and people are like very much scared about so many different things. Like I talked about the election, the voting machines, and I talked about like towers being close and the non-danger with that. The voting machine's way more concerning. Just look up the DEF CON videos. And all I'll say about that is they gave it to adults 1 year, and because it was too easy, they gave it to children. Yeah.
Well, actually, I was going to bring up something else, but I don't think I'm going to, because I think the last 5 minutes we had was actually a good note to end this on. I think we hit a logical, positive conclusion.
Yeah.
So I would say, send me your recording file. As everyone knows, we do this remotely. And send me those links. I think you already did, but you can send them over Skype too.
Sure.
And, is there anything else you want to say? I'll put the Twitter in the description. I'll put the link in the description. I'll put any other information you want in the description about you as well, so people can find you. But anything else you want to plug or say?
I just hope that that people share optimism with the future as far as networking and technology goes, because it is a very bright and far future that we have ahead of us when it comes to just being cable free. And that's been the hope of a lot of people in technology. And we wouldn't have gotten there without both disruptions with AMD and Google and all the companies, while at the same time pure incompetence and malice of other companies. And I won't say who specifically, but
there's always going to be more bad in the future, but on average, we're getting better.
Yeah.
It's not I will say this. I think people assume things always get better. No. They only get better because we make them better. So you can't stop fighting.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm going to be honest. You're not a realist if you're a complete pessimist, because if you look at the trajectory of history, things are going pretty well. And the things that are going to be bad are probably not going to be what you expect. Let's be clear about that.
If anyone wants to know the real bad stuff, I'm also a policy advisor. So I can point out the real bad stuff to worry about and also the good stuff to be happy about. So I can do both.
Well, I mean, and the bad stuff to worry about is vaping and rock music, right?
Vaping is fog machine smoke. So
that's not what ABC News told me.
I know. They're talking about, you're getting them long popcorns, okay? You gotta get that butter, for them long popcorns.
Yep. All right. Well, I think on that note, I will close this. And God, thanks for reaching out. I think this was great. And I think everyone will appreciate this episode. Broken Silicon, a PC hardware and gaming podcast, is predominantly brought to you by me, Tom, of Moore's Law is Dead. You can find all of my content, including videos, articles, and this podcast at www.mooreslawsdead.com. And of course, it is also often co-hosted by my brother, Dan. And it is edited by my sound engineer, Gerard Cortez. You can find his contact information at www.mooreslawsdead.com. You can also find the contact information of my article editor, Carbon Cry. Now, of course, if you want to keep the show running, I really do hope you rate me on your podcasting platform of choice. Share it with your friends. And if you have the money, but only if you do, consider supporting me on Patreon at Moore's Law is Dead. If you do, you get access to the Discord to talk to other enlightening people who work not just at AMD, not just at NVIDIA, but often in the server space and other computing areas that people often overlook. And of course, if you support it, you can get access to reading these people's names that keep the show running. But without further ado, let me give thanks to my greatest supporters. On October 11th, 2019, the following supporters are at the net burst 10 gigahertz level or higher. Bootman, Hunter Drake, Dean, Ruckus, Justin Yant, Thomas Rupp, Tomas Barrage, Jesse Blanton, Jordan Betcher, Mohammed Al-Kawari, Matthew Brubacher, Prime Tech TV, Justin Parrish, Zachary Martin, Terrence Harrod, Carl Marco, Otterwise Tech, Thy Rister, The Ninth Dude, Greg Reniger, Keelan Lau, Daniel Cage, Night Rogue 77, Mechanical Philosopher, Lebo King Kilo, Bollocks, Derek Evans, Matthew McMullen, Christoph Novak, Neil X01, Matt Salem, Aaron Close, Sexy, Scott Scoff, Frederick Lau, Alexander Dolar, Aletheros, Telos, Caden, Greg T. Wanchik, Jacob Barber, Exoti, Whiny Carebear, Matthew Lane, Paul Jones, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Wow, thank you, Jedi. And of course, thank you to Sahara for the music, and thank you to William. His information is in the links below for joining me for this episode.